Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello and a warm welcome to this week's Reflections, the programme from Torch Trust that explores faith and disability in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker, and today we'll be marking Sign Language Week. Well, Tracy and I have worked together for many years now, but me being blind and her being deaf makes life quite interesting sometimes. How did it all begin? Well, I was living in Watford with a blind friend in the 80s, and I was travelling around because I was in full-time sort of music ministry, singing. I was going abroad a lot. And Penny, my friend, went to my old school, Chorleywood College, to take a Christian Union meeting and met Tracy there, who was doing voluntary service, wanting to do social work with blind people. But she'd just been told she was too deaf to do that and felt very depressed. So Penn invited her to come to our house and said she lived with me, this full-time gospel singer. And so Tracy felt a bit nervous because she hadn't been a Christian that long and she was wondering what to talk about all evening. And so what happened, Trace, when you arrived?
Miss Marilyn said I'd felt nervous and tried to think of things to say, but when I knocked on the door, Marilyn wasn't actually there. Her friend answered, and then I got in, started to get my coat off, and Marilyn started coming downstairs, and she looked like something out of a horror film. She was covered in red. I thought it was blood, and I was panicking a bit. But when she got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw that she was laughing. And I thought you don't laugh if you've had a terrible accident. And I suddenly saw she had a plastic bag on her head and realised that it wasn't blood at all, but in fact she'd tried to dye her hair.
Yes, I dyed my hair. And once Trace had finished clearing up the dye from the bathroom and scraping it off my back even, we'd become great friends and we'd laughed all the time. And then my assistant, she decided to leave and I needed someone with me on the road. And I asked Trace to help me find someone because I knew she knew a lot of people that might be good, help me with the interviews and that. And Trace could hear more then, but nobody seemed suitable. So I said, can you help out for a bit while you're waiting for a job? And the first concert we did together was a big program and I didn't feel that well. And then I asked Trace if she could speak, tell her faith story. I said the word testimony. She wasn't sure what that was. But anyway, she wanted to help me and so she tried. What sort of happened then, Trace?
Well, I was really nervous and I'd never spoken in anything public. I'd avoided public things because of my deafness and also because of a tricky background that made me very shy and nervous of being in social situations. And I was sort of literally shaken, but I said to the Lord, please help me. And the moment I got to the mic, I felt this sort of ability to start to speak. And I shared my story, which involved quite some deep things. At the end, people were really kind of responding and warm to me. And in fact, it went very, very quiet, and you could almost hear a pin drop. At the very end of the event, lots of people became Christians and rededicated their lives. And there was such a sense of God having been there. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we really knew because of the effect of all that we were called to work together. And it is unusual to have this combination of one deaf person and one blind person working together, especially in a music ministry. But people did seem to accept it. But people do wonder how we communicate. Well, it used to be easier. And in concerts, we had a little speaker near Tracy's ear, but she can't hear that now. But we also use a language called the Deaf-Blind Manual, where we spell out letters on the hands. It's quite handy if you want to say something quite private. And we also use people typing for conferences and things that we run. And I type on Tracy's iPad using a Bluetooth keyboard. But Trace recently has found an app which really has helped. I wonder if you want to tell people about that, Trace.
Yes, but that's been a wonderful, life-changing app in a way. And I found it just before COVID. It's called Live Transcribe, and it's an accessibility app on Android phones. You can get similar on Apple things, but basically all the external speech, like conversations going on, or if someone comes to the door, it transcribes. And you see, I'm visually impaired as well. I can only see very large fonts, but this particular app comes up in a huge font if I want it to. And so it means I can now carry the phone in my hand and be in conversation with someone and their words would come up. It can be a bit naughty. It can come up with some rude things sometimes when it misinterprets.
It gets
Or
wrong,
if
doesn't
there's
it?
lots of conversations going on, it can get very muddled. Because of course it doesn't tell me who's actually speaking. But it's much better than my own hearing, because I can't hear anyone at all. But now, because of this, I can be in conversation with people. So
This app, Live Transcribe, it was invented by Google. And I'm losing hearing a bit now. So our favourite phrase in our house is, "What did you say?" But Trace certainly contributes a great deal to the ministry. I'm primarily a musician. I do speak in between, but Trace does much more teaching now, and we do a lot more things online. And so you bring real prophetic edge to what we do, don't you, Trace? What do you feel about that?
yes, well, it's wonderful to hear God's heart for people. And I mean, sometimes just a baby little thought can drop in my mind. Once we were leading a conference and it was lunchtime and people were going out, but I think we had a line of team members, including ourselves, praying for people to receive God's love just before they went out. And this lady came up and she had lots of bags with her and she put them down. And in that moment, God spoke in my heart and said, "This lady's carrying too much responsibility in her life and she needs to put some of it down." And so I just asked her very simply, "Do you think you have a bit too much responsibility?" And she started to really cry. And she was kind of enabled through that to think through her life and put some things down.
You help people tune into hearing God for themselves, and you kind of help bear the spiritual burden of what we do, which is fantastic. We certainly do have some fun things, though. I mean, one day we were having a little argument, but we were on the way to meet a friend to go to the theatre. And as we walked along, we were communicating on the hands, getting a bit cross. And when we got to meet our friend, she said to our shock, "Well, what were you arguing about?" I mean, we were doing it using the deafblind manual, but she could see our language on the hands was getting more sort of frantic and more emphatic. It was really quite embarrassing. But anyway, we had a good laugh about it. Have you got something you remember, Trace? What happened?
Well, yes, that time certainly did make us laugh. But I remember one time when we were travelling on the road and we were in this big church coming up to the time when the concert would begin. And Marilyn and I had gone into the loos, and suddenly there was a power cut. And the whole church was plunged into blackness. And as it was winter, it really was dark.
Winter, yeah.
And I wasn't sure how to get back to the room where everyone else was. I was panicking. But Marilyn said I'll be able to hear. And so together we kind of fumbled our way back. With Marilyn kind of me more in that instance and relying on her hearing.
I remember the time when we were going to an event and I couldn't understand why you weren't getting ready for it. And when I questioned you, you'd misheard the time and thought it was 2 hours later. I mean, you're using Live Transcribe now to hear me, aren't you? Because we haven't managed to get the captions loaded on Zoom. But we know actually that it could have only been the Lord that had such an idea to put two people with very different disabilities together, forming a unique and very special partnership. And actually, you can read our book. We joint wrote it, mainly written by Trace, though, and it's called A Beautiful Tapestry. It's actually in the Torch Library. We tell you just how life really is on the road, and also lots of fun, the things that happen to us when we're traveling around, and all about the naughtiness of our dogs. That features pretty strongly too. But despite Trace now being registered severely visually impaired, in fact, she's going to apply for a guide dog, we make time specially to communicate. We sit down together with the iPad or with the phone. We've lost a bit of spontaneity, I think, really, because of that. But we want to make the most of every day that we can use, have fun, and still work together. We've enjoyed telling all about our lives.
Yes, it's been lovely.
Yeah. So look out for us. Look out for the book. Thank you.
Bye from me.
Someone else who became deaf and chose to learn sign language is longtime friend of Torch and author of many Christian books, Emily Owen. Here she is in conversation with Lynn Davies, talking about how learning sign language changed her life.
For listeners who are not familiar with your story, could you tell us how you got deaf as a result of NF2?
So just a really short kind of overview. When I was 16 years old, I could hear fine. I was born hearing, but at 16 years old, I was diagnosed with this condition, NF2, which means that I grow benign tumours on nerves anywhere in the body, really. Particularly for me, it was on the auditory nerves. When the tumours had to be removed, that's when I went deaf, and that was when I was 21.
You lost your hearing as an adult, and you can talk because you've heard before, but you also chose to learn sign language. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and what that was like?
Yeah. So when I was, as I say, I was 16 when I was diagnosed with this condition, and I was told that one day in the future I would need surgery that would take away my hearing. And to be honest, I thought, oh no, that will never happen to me. I'm not a deaf person. When we were told that news, my mum said, well, we'd better go and learn sign language then. And I was sort of like, well, why are we going to learn sign language? And she said, well, because you're going to be deaf one day, which was a hard conversation, but it was true. And I didn't want to learn sign language, but my mum insisted. And I can tell you, I'm so thankful that she insisted, because I do speak sign language now, and I would really not want to be without it. I didn't find it really easy to learn. So it's not as though I went to sign language classes for 6 months and then I was fluent. Nothing like that. I found it quite hard to learn, but probably especially because I knew why I was learning it. I think other people will learn it more quickly than I did. But yeah, it's invaluable for me now.
So how has it changed your life and how you relate and communicate to, I suppose, both deaf and hearing people?
Well, so generally in my life, the people that I come across day to day are not deaf. Actually, most people in my life are hearing, which is why I thank God that I am able to lip read, because those people don't sign. Why would they? But sometimes I come across people who are like me, who have lost their hearing and decided to learn sign language, or people who are born deaf and sign language is their first language. And when I meet with those people, it's so relaxing to actually be able to speak in sign language with them, and not to sort of focus so much on lip reading. I mean, I'm still not fluent in sign language, but I can get by. So, for example, if there's an interpreter at church, I can understand what they say. So it's really helpful for me.
And what was it like getting to know the deaf community as someone who lost her hearing later, is there a big divide between people who are born deaf and people who became deaf later on?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because if you'd asked me when I first became deaf, I just said, oh no, deaf people, we're all just deaf people. And after I did lose my hearing, I went to join a local deaf kind of social group. And the majority of people there, it turned out, were born deaf. And that was when I learned that there is a difference between born deaf and deafened. Because if you're born deaf, you can't talk. But if you're deafened, you can talk. And so
Right.
immediately there's that difference, and a difference in way of communicating, a difference in culture, which surprised me, but it is a different culture as well. So often when you lose your hearing, you're kind of like a halfway house between the real deaf world and the real hearing world.
So has there ever been a time when using sign language has opened up any doors for you, or whether it's helped you in any unexpected situations?
Um, well, one thing that I find sign language really helpful in actually is when I go into the university and I talk to healthcare students about communication. But because I could tell them the theory about it, that because I'm able to speak sign language, I can actually show them what it's like not to be able to understand easily. So I can stand at the front and speak in sign language without my voice. And they understand what it's like not to be able to understand somebody talking to you. Although there was one occasion when somebody did understand sign language, but generally they don't. I'm just really, really thankful that I speak sign language. And it's actually really useful with children as well, I find. I mean, I don't have children myself, but my sisters have children. So obviously they've grown up with me. And from a very young age, I would teach them very simple sign language. And that was just really helpful for them. And actually, even before they could talk, they were able to communicate with sign language. So, so yeah, it was really nice to be able to do that. I mean, overall, if I'm honest, I would kind of wish that I'd never needed to learn sign language. But given that I did need to learn sign language, I'm glad I can sign.
You may remember that a couple of weeks ago on the programme we mentioned Lydia and Becky, who were running a half marathon to raise money for Torch. We're delighted to say they completed the race and raised about £1,000. Congratulations to them both. We really appreciate their efforts. Here's Torch CEO Sarah Dawkins, who was there watching from the sidelines.
I'm so thankful for all the training that Becky and Lydia did in the lead up to the Bath Half Marathon. They were both fantastic, and it was so exciting to be there, to see them as they crossed the finish line, and to be able to cheer them on and thank them personally for all the miles that they had run, not only that day, but also in the lead up to the race itself. They both did absolutely fantastically, and being able to celebrate with them at the end was amazing, not only at their achievement of running half marathons, and both were so happy with their times, but also to be able to celebrate with them with the amount of money that was raised for Torch in that time. We're so thankful that at the time of which we're recording this, we've raised around £1,000 for the work of Torch. So if you gave towards that, thank you so much. It was such a great opportunity to get behind people doing something practical and people literally going the extra mile in order to raise money for Torch for all of the resources and things that we offer people. I've never been to cheer someone on at a race like this before, so I think I was a little bit taken aback by just how busy it was and the amount of people that were there. Lydia told me afterwards that apparently running around the race there were people giving out jelly babies and Haribo everywhere they went. It was a brilliant atmosphere, and as I said, such an amazing time to be able to celebrate the goodness of God in all that he has done and continues to do in Torch. We are so thankful for so many supporters that help fund us in order to provide really great resources as well as the Bible to people who are visually impaired. I was particularly also thrilled to note that the medals that they both got at the end had Braille on them as well, that spelled out finisher. It's so great to see how these races can just be so inclusive. So once again, if you have been part of this in any way, thank you so much. If you're part of the crowd cheering people on last Sunday, thank you for all the cheers that no doubt will have encouraged Becky and Lydia. And thank you for being part of this movement where we are saying that all people, regardless of their sight, should have equal opportunity to experience relationship with Jesus. Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this week, but we'll be back next week when it's Palm Sunday. And don't forget, if you'd like to find out more about how Torch can support you and our work, ring our friendly client services team who would love to hear from you. You can call us on 01858 438 260. That's 01858 438 260. Or you can email info@torchtrust.org. We're also on social media. Just search for Torch Trust on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. So from me, Marilyn and the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.